Hi, I guess we're ready to start. It's a little after 7, but we'll get going. So I've got things set up slightly different, and we tried to go on YouTube tonight, but when I went on there, I didn't realize it says the first time you go on YouTube, you have to give them 24 hours notice so that they can check you out and give you permission. And so I tried this at about 5 o'clock tonight, and so what we're going to do is record it and put it on YouTube. It will go on YouTube like the last one, but it's also on Facebook tonight too. And this should be our last time on Facebook if everything will just work out. Technology, I'm so good with it.
Tell me the name of the YouTube channel again.
The YouTube channel starts with a capital N,
Okay.
and all one word. Everything else is small. Neil's History Hub.
Okay.
Neil's History Hub. No apostrophe. Just all one big word.
Got you.
But a capital N, and you can go there and click on it, and last week's stuff is on there. It's on 2 segments, okay? And how do I look on that camera, okay? Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah. Anyway,
You're not in on this one.
I'm not?
No,
Oh, hi. Okay, so that's some housekeeping items. I want to tell the Castledale City Council and the Conservancy District and the Special Service District, all who use this building, thank you for letting us use it. It's very nice, and we're happy to be here, and they're trying to make it a little warmer for us, but it's kind of cold tonight a little bit. But they're very accommodating, very nice to us, and we appreciate them. And as I said, hopefully we will be on YouTube Live next week. That's the hope and the plan. Okay, any questions before we get started? We got to the election of 1952, and the hope is that tonight we will finish with the political history of the 1950s. And then next week, we will talk about the cultural history of the 1950s, where some of the people who are here, whose mothers told them about the 50s, I'm kidding, you were there, I know it. You can add to us and help us and tell us, that's not how it was or whatever, because I was born in 57. We'll talk about my birthday tonight. And I don't remember the 50s that I can think of. There's maybe one little memory that I have, but mostly not. Okay, last week we talked about the election of 1952, where Dwight David Eisenhower, of course with a natural nickname of Ike, absolutely smashes that election, and he beats Adlai Stevenson. Even the solid South they talk about, voting Democratic, didn't do that.
Was there a reason that Truman didn't run again? He could have.
Truman could have run again, but I'll tell you, many people have looked at this, and one of the biggest things is when he fired MacArthur. That was the right thing to do. It was also the unpopular thing to do. And that really began to drop his popularity, not all that much before the election. I mean, a year or so, but it really cut his popularity. And he had barely won his last election, and he looked at it and said, not worth it. And so again, both parties, the Democratic Party didn't want to run Truman again, too. And both parties tried to get Ike to run for them, and he chose to be a Republican. Before that, he'd never been anything. Hardly voted. Okay, we talked about how Stalin died of a brain aneurysm, a terrible stroke, and I made a very insensitive remark about Stalin in saying that he suffered for many hours before he finally died, and none of his people dared go in and help him, because the only thing more dangerous than not helping Stalin is helping him. And I know that was an insensitive remark, but I stand by it.
It's true.
It's true. And Nikita Khrushchev then begins to consolidate power around himself. And it's going to take a few years for him to be the dictator of Russia, but he's going to get there.
What was he before?
He was in the, he was one of the leaders of the Communist Party, in the Politburo, and for many of you don't know this, when Stalingrad was in danger of falling in World War II in 1941-42, Stalingrad looked like it was going to collapse. Stalin sent Khrushchev down there, and Khrushchev went down and took the leaders that were running the army, and he either let them shoot themselves or he shot them and turned the defense of Stalingrad around. Khrushchev was considered a big hero for the Battle of Stalingrad. So he had a good reputation among the Russian military. Okay? We talked about, with Stalin's death, that the North Koreans and the Chinese could get permission to end the war. And we ended the fighting, but the war continues. I see that North Korea just this last week is testing a cruise missile that they launched from a submarine. So as far as North Korea is concerned, we're still at war. And so the United States is always on a war footing in South Korea. And I did mention that if you want a military career in the Army, you will spend a year in Korea for sure. That's just going to happen, because that is still a dangerous hotspot. And for Gwen and I, our son was on a cruise missile ship. I think Meryl, your son-in-law, was there too. Yeah, same guy, same person. He on his cruise missile ship, they spent part of their time protecting one side of an aircraft carrier, but they spent a lot of their time sitting off the coast of North Korea waiting for orders to launch cruise missiles. And so it's still a dangerous hotspot in the world.
With Korea, it was never a declared war, right?
Never a declared war. This is the first time they came up with a term they used again later in Vietnam. It was a police action. I know. Marshall Dillon, never saw him. Dragnet, never saw him. They didn't arrest anybody. They tried to use the term a police action, and it was obviously a war.
Was that just to bypass Congress?
Yes, because this was the first war where we continued. We were already drafting for occupation forces, but we kicked up the draft for more and continued it. And it's the first war of that type where a president didn't go to Congress and ask for a declaration. Truman did not ask for a declaration of war. He just began fighting it. And the excuse he used was, we're fighting it as the United Nations. We're helping the United Nations. But, about close to 90% of the troops were either American or South Korean. But Australia sent troops, Indonesia sent troops, a few other Pacific nations sent troops to help fight in that war. Yeah. The U.S. and the British, using our top secret spy networks, overthrew the elected government of Iran because we didn't think they were that friendly to the United States. And we moved their figurehead king, called there in Iran a Shah, gave him real power, and he becomes the dictator and forms his own secret police and begins cracking down on people. And this is him. He was the Shah Reza Pahlavi. And in the United States, we called it Operation Ajax, and in the United Kingdom, Britain, they called it Operation Boot. And our secret forces, our spy forces, who were supposed to gather information, went ahead and put this guy on the throne of Iran. And he would be there until 1976, when he would be overthrown by the Ayatollah Khomeini. We'll get there and talk about that. Then, McCarthy terrorized people for 4 years looking for communists. He never found communists, but he always claimed there were communists here, communists there. There were homosexuals, he said, in the State Department, and homosexuals in Hollywood. Big surprise. I mean, honestly. But he never found the homosexual who was closest to him, and that was his assistant. That was his assistant. As far as hunting down spies and communists, he didn't do it. As far as promoting himself and scaring people and ruining families by accusing them of being communists without evidence, no evidence, and accusing people, he ruined the careers and lives of thousands. And there were a few, just a handful, of men accused of being communists who could no longer find work and killed themselves, committed suicide. And when he turned on the army, he picked on somebody who was tougher than him. And he had the Army McCarthy hearings, and the army fought back. And they were televised. And for the first time, the American public didn't read in the papers or see pictures of McCarthy. They watched him in action. And he was sweaty, and he would get nervous, and he didn't look good on television. And when the army came back after him, he was on the defensive, and he lost support. And that's all it took for President Eisenhower, who hated McCarthy, to jump in and discredit him further, and Congress also, who had tired of him. And they censured him and refused to give him any committee assignments in the Senate. And he died in 1957 of alcoholism. And then we talked about the first nuclear-powered submarine. We were making nuclear power work. We invented it, we blew things up with it, and we thought maybe we can make this work for us. And so we began to use it in our war machines. And today, I don't think we have any aircraft carriers that are not nuclear powered. I think they're all nuclear powered.
And all the submarines.
And all the submarines, and many other ships. However, I will say this, the ship my son was on was diesel powered, still.
Yeah, I got to it in that. Look at the generator.
Merrill went down and looked at the generator in that ship, and diesel generator.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, they had some turbines down there too.
okay.
Didn't it make the first crossing under the North Pole?
Yes, it took, because of the length of time, it crossed underneath the ice, got to the North Pole, and was able to break up through the ice and be at the North Pole.
That was Jimmy Carter that was the captain of that.
He was a Navy officer, but Jimmy Carter was more than just a naval officer.
He was an engineer.
He was an engineer, a nuclear engineer.
Yeah.
Jimmy Carter's expertise was in nuclear engineering. So he was the perfect one for that job. Again, I got to teach a kid who joined the Navy and became a sonar operator. And he was the sonar operator. They have more than one, but he was one of them on this submarine. And he sent me a picture because, I was his teacher. And that's how students are. They just love their teachers. But he did like me. And he sent me a picture of him at the North Pole. His submarine had once again crossed under the polar ice cap, broken up through, and they let the sailors get off and have a picture of the submarine with them standing by it. And he got copies and sent to his family and things, but he sent me one too. And I really cherish that. That was a neat thing. Okay, then we talked about Brown versus the Board of Education, a unanimous decision by the Supreme Court that said Plessy versus Ferguson is wrong. There is no way separate can be equal. Separate can't be equal. And it said all schools will desegregate. And a few did. The South said, well, nice ruling, it's just not going to affect us. And refused to desegregate. Many of them. However, some did desegregate, and this was this was Linda Brown who sued. It was actually her dad who arranged the lawsuit, but it was done in her name And the men who carried it out were here and knew how to appear before the Supreme Court, and it was a unanimous decision that would ultimately, over time, change education forever. Thank goodness.
What year was that?
1954. 1954. Yeah. Okay, this is where we left off last time, where we're going to start. So, at the end of World War II, we called on Great Britain to decolonize. Give up your colonies and let them become nations, their own nations. We thought colonization was a bad thing. Britain also called on us to decolonize, make Puerto Rico a nation, make Samoa a nation, Guam, etc. The problem we had is they didn't want to be nations. They kind of liked their status. And Puerto Rico has turned down nationhood and statehood several times. If we could get them to be the 51st state, our flag would look a lot better, more even. 51's a good number there. But they like the status they have. They are a territory of the United States, but for example, in the Olympics, they compete as a separate nation. And they bring all their kids home to Puerto Rico from the universities they're going to in the United States to compete for Puerto Rico. And they're very proud of being Puerto Rico. They want to be Puerto Rico, a territory of the United States. And we since then have allowed them to elect their own governor and their own officers, and they're able to send a person to Congress as an observer and a lobbyist, but the majority of people don't want to be a state or a nation. They like their status right now. But England began to give up its colonies. And ultimately, they don't want to give up India. That's their most expensive or lucrative, let me say it that way, their most lucrative colony. But Mohandas Gandhi is soon called the Mahatma, and he begins to teach his people how to use civil disobedience, peaceful resistance to get rid of the British. And ultimately it worked.
It wasn't so peaceful when they were shooting them
His biggest problem, Mohandas Gandhi's biggest problem is India had several different religions. Several. But the two biggest were Hindu and Islam. And the Hindus and the Muslims fought each other. So he's trying to get them all just to quit killing each other and resist the British. One time they had thousands of Indian people come and lay on a railroad track, taking up a few miles. And the British said, what do we do?
Run over them.
And they ran over some of them for a while till it stopped, and they made sure they had the press there taking pictures and sending reports, and the British looked like complete idiots. But ultimately, what they did is they broke off Pakistan from India, made it a Muslim nation, and said, now if you're Muslim and you're living elsewhere in India, you better go up there. And the rest of India, you're Hindu. And now if you're living up in what's Pakistan and you're Hindu, maybe you better move back down here. And so they have done that. There is still one state of India where both the Muslims and the Hindus are still to this day fighting over that state that's right on the border. But way down on the far east side of India, there was a big collection of Muslims also. And so they called that East Pakistan. And it was governed by Pakistan. But they eventually got their independence, and they're called today Bangladesh. And they are a Muslim state that is not beholding to Pakistan. So there's a quick history on Indian independence. When Gandhi was able to get that split off and the people united, Great Britain granted them their independence. And nation after nation was granted their independence. And we encourage that, decolonization. Some places didn't want to no longer be associated with Great Britain. South Africa is a good example. We wanted to keep a good relationship with Great Britain. Not necessarily be governed by them, but keep a good relationship. Even Canada and Australia and New Zealand have a relationship with Great Britain, but they're not governed by them anymore. The nation that didn't want to give up their colonies at the end of World War II was France. France, under de Gaulle and others, said, we want our colonies back. And we said, you lost. Any way you look at it, the Nazis overran you in a month, 6 weeks at the most, and you surrendered. And de Gaulle of France said, yeah, but a lot of us escaped to Great Britain and then came back and fought. And we want to keep our colonies. And their two most lucrative colonies were Algeria in North Africa, which they demanded back, and French Indochina, which included Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And they said, we want that back. We were not inclined to help them. And here's where we make one of the biggest mistakes ever, one of the stupidest mistakes ever, and it's going to cost us for decades. France said, in Algeria, the Russians are trying to bring communists in. And in Southeast Asia, in French Indochina, they're trying to bring communists in there too. Give it to us and we'll keep the communists out. Now, we were so afraid of communists that we backed off the United States and agreed to let France have their colonies back. Now, why was that a mistake? Because you don't beat communism through getting puppets to work it for you. You beat communism with capitalism. I think you see that today, where Vietnam's #1 trading partner in the world right now is the United States of America. And by the way, it is one of the top 10 foreign destinations for tourists to go to Vietnam. Okay, I'm going to get on a soapbox, and I apologize. I really do.
So what's in Vietnam? You took us over to see.
One thing is, former soldiers who fought in the Vietnam War go back to see how it is. That's part of it. But it's cheap. It's inexpensive to go there. And the same with Cambodia and Laos, especially Cambodia. And your daughter took a vacation to Cambodia and loved it. There's temples, there's culture, there's all kinds of beautiful things in these places to see too. And it's cheap. It's very inexpensive. And so it's one of the top 10 destinations for people traveling out of the United States, is Vietnam. I'm sorry.
They got a beautiful coastline too.
Beautiful coastline. And thanks to, what was the movie? Apocalypse Now, we know that they have great waves for surfing there. Because during that movie, a whole bunch of guys went and surfed there while the helicopters were guarding them. I don't know. Dumb. But it is an inexpensive and great place to go. And the LDS Church has missionaries in both Cambodia and Vietnam now. Other Christian churches have missionaries in both places. Here's my thing. I'm back on the soapbox. I believe in free market economy, capitalism, at least a mixed economy, trying to achieve capitalism. I believe in democracy. I believe that we're a republic. That's our strength. Why didn't we just use our strength? but instead we turned it back over to France. And they lost Algeria ultimately. The rebels in Algeria basically took it away from France. And they were fighting to defend and keep Indonesia, or I keep saying Indonesia, French Indochina, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. The French were fighting like crazy. And it broke out into the Vietnam War. It broke out into the war. And the north is where the communists, this is a map of, here's Cambodia, and here's Laos, this is Thailand. But in the north is where the communists had concentrated because it was up against China and easier to move weapons and things into there. And so they concentrated in the north, the communists, and in the south, the French built schools and businesses, and they had lots and lots of plantations. The French wanted this area because they wanted two big products, rubber and rice. Rubber and rice plantations. But they were behind the times, the French were. When we were running out of rubber, thanks to the Japanese taking the Philippines, we invented synthetic rubber, and it was taking over the market. We didn't need the rubber trees and the rubber plantations anymore. The French didn't need them, but they were trying to run this. And their Vietnam War breaks out big time in the early 1950s. And they're fighting the Vietnam War the same as we would do 10 years later. Exactly the same. And they are fighting wherever they can. And Ho Chi Minh, the leader of the Communist Party, he had learned to fight the Japanese. And here's the other thing. During World War II, Ho Chi Minh was on our side. Yeah, he was a communist. He'd become a communist when he had been living in France. But he came back and he organized the Communist Party there. And here's where we made a huge mistake. To the Chinese, communism was the way to go. To the Vietnamese, communism was a tool to get their independence. It's just a tool. They were not so sold on making everything collectives and doing the same things they had seen kind of fail in Russia and in China. And so he wanted to use communism as a way to fight the French and get their independence. And here's the problem. Some American diplomats had told Ho Chi Minh, if you'll fight the Japanese in World War II, we'll give you your independence. Now, that wasn't official. The president had never signed off. Congress had never signed off, but diplomats that were trying to get them to kill Japanese made these kind of promises. And at the end of the war, they didn't keep any of those promises. And Ho Chi Minh said, we killed the Japanese because they tried to take us over, now we'll kill the French. And so they began fighting the French. And the fateful day was in 1954. Okay, 1954. This is Ho Chi Minh, right here, checking out a map, with this little kid. That little kid is General Giap, J-I-A-P, General Giap. He's the commander of the communist forces, believe it or not. And he was freaking brilliant when it came to military strategy.
In that picture, was he?
In that picture, he was probably 35, but he looks young.
Yeah.
And way up here, at a place called Dien Bien Phu, he retreated. He retreated with his forces, and they said, oh no, they're headed for the Laotian border. And so the French rushed in and took a hill at Dien Bien Phu. They were up on a hill. And that's what General Giap needed him to do. And then he surrounded him. And in horrible fighting, he gave up people knowing that he could lose actually 9 of his people for every Frenchman he killed and still win the war. And so, with crazy attacks, suicide rushes up this hill, the French start to die. And then the only way in or out then on that hill was by French helicopters. And they began to shoot down French helicopters with Russian weapons. And they're starving the French out. And again, they're rushing, they'll lose 9 men. But if you kill 1 Frenchman, you're ahead. And in 1954, I have 2 pictures here for you. This is the Frenchmen surrendering to the Vietnamese. That mighty French army that was going to rule all of French Indochina surrendered. And the surrender carried a condition. France had to leave. And this is them being marched out. Look at that line of men that were being marched out. The same thing down here. Look at the men, the condition they're in. And here are the people guarding them. And General Giap won this huge battle of Dien Bien Phu and becomes a hero of the Vietnamese communist people. And finally, Ho Chi Minh and General Giap and others say, well, we're finally free. And the French turn to us and say, we told you communism was going to take over. We're turning it over to the United States. And now we have to make a decision. Do we let French Indochina, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos go communist? Or do we go stop it?
What year did the French leave?
1954, the year they lost at Dien Bien Phu.
What year were they divided into North and South Vietnam?
1956, and we're going to show you that here in just a minute. 1956. So what we did is we said, we know who can handle this, the CIA. And they came in and began to put people in the towns, villages, and cities like Saigon down here in South Vietnam. They began to put people in places they wanted them. Meantime, the Communist Party is getting stronger and more powerful and has this incredible reputation for not losing. Lose men, but not lose battles. And the French are out. Honestly, hindsight's 50-50. But I don't know. It just seems to me, let them have it. Make them our trading partners. We learned later, we were so afraid of the communist Chinese up here, we later learned that Vietnam and China hate each other. We should have known that. Where was our CIA then? When we leave Vietnam, the next war in that area is between the Vietnamese and the Chinese. They hate each other. And Russia backed Vietnam. We made some mistakes. Our politicians didn't know enough. They thought it was Korea all over again. And it's not. Okay, enough of that. Russia needed to counter us. We had formed NATO to stop the Russians from expanding. And NATO said, oh, now, the Russians said, NATO is now going to expand if we don't do something to stop it. And so they formed, in 1955, the Warsaw Pact. And it was formed in Poland. It included Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and the USSR. Got together and formed, this was their symbol of the Warsaw Pact. Here's where they sat around and made the Warsaw Pact. And now the divisions in Europe are hardened. And we sat across a line and stared at each other. Okay? Now, let's talk about what's happening in America. It's 1955. Race relations are not good in the South. Other places, they were not so terrible. I mean, if you want to be a real historian and look at it, I know there are people who want to tell you it was terrible throughout all of America. But it wasn't necessarily so. The Army was desegregated. The Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines were all desegregated. Baseball, professional baseball was desegregated. Professional football was desegregated. Other professional sports were becoming desegregated. The NBA.
What happened? They're all.
White men can't jump.
Right.
It's that simple. I'm sorry. Being a basketball expert myself, I know why. No, I honestly played in junior high, so I know. But most people mark the beginning of the real civil rights movement from 1955 with what happened here. And it was the murder of Emmett Till. The murder of Emmett Till, they mark as the beginning of the civil rights movement. Now, as I said, things were getting better, slowly, but they were getting better, and this is going to kick it into high gear. So this young man, 14 years old, lived up in the north, Chicago, and he left to visit relatives down in Mississippi. And he got there, and he was hanging out with his cousins and talking, and he went into a store with one of his cousins, and the other cousins around there said, "That's a white store. You shouldn't be going in there." But he went in, and then what happens is totally up to dispute. But this woman was behind the counter, Carolyn Bryant. And she claims that Emmett Till made an obscene suggestion to her and whistled at her. And she rebuffed that, and ordered him out, and he left. His cousin said he didn't make any such suggestion. He bought what he'd come in for, and he left. So we don't know what happened. We'll have to wait until God comes out with the movie of it or something, because we don't know. But Emmett Till went out, and hours later, Roy Bryant, her husband, comes to the store, and she says, "There was a black kid in here who made an obscene suggestion to me and whistled." At first, she didn't want to tell him, because she knew he had a bad temper, but finally she did tell him. And he went and got his cousin, J.W. Millam, and they went out after looking for Emmett Till. And they found Emmett Till. They caught this 14-year-old, and they tortured him to death and left his body there. His body was taken back to his hometown. This is his coffin. This is his funeral. That's very insensitive of me to show this picture, huh? But it's not. This is his mom. His mom said, "His face is beat in, his body is damaged. I want a viewing, and I want people to look at what they're doing down there. I want people to see this." So he had an open casket viewing. He looked terrible. And she said, "I am never letting anybody forget what happened there." And she never did. Spent her life telling people about her son and what happened to him. And that's why it's kind of the kickoff of the civil rights movement. These two men were captured, arrested, charged with murder, and found not guilty by an all-white jury.
How could they not be guilty?
What's that?
How could they not be guilty?
How could they not be guilty? Okay, you got to listen. I'm just kidding you, Cheryl. But they were tried by an all-white jury and a white judge. That's how.
Or they just kangaroo.
And the trial is fun. It's fun. It's interesting to read about the trial. It's interesting to read about the trial because the prosecution was saying these are cold-blooded killers of a 14-year-old boy. And they said, we were defending womanhood in the South.
I don't think so.
And they were found not guilty and released. And now they can't be tried for that again. So a year later, in an interview, they came out and said, yeah, we did it. We totally admit we did it. Can't do anything about it now.
The feds didn't have their policy with their civil rights violations then.
There were no civil rights violations. The last Civil Rights Act had been passed in 1868. It's now 1955. There has not been a Civil Rights Act since 1868. The feds had no authority over this. But that was going to do something to the feds. Okay? Then, that was in the fall, in December 1st to be exact. This is Rosa Parks in Montgomery, Alabama. She went and sat down on a bus in the right section where she was supposed to, the black section. But the bus filled up. Now, this is a reenactment. I know. This is a reenactment of what they did. They came and put her on there and took her picture. This was an actual picture done that day. She was sitting there and she said, I was tired. I was tired. And sitting there, and the bus was crowded, and a white man got on and there was no place for him to sit. So the law was black people had to move for white people. So he came over and told her, move, get out of my seat. It was in the black section, but it was a seat. And she had to move so he could have a seat. Because the bus was packed. And she said, I'm not moving. And he said to the bus driver, she won't move and let me have the seat. The bus driver pulled over, got off the bus, went to a call box. Do any of you remember call boxes they had in the cities where you could go in? And he called the police from this call box. And they came and she wouldn't get out, and so they arrested her and pulled her off the bus. And this is her mugshot at the police station. That was her mugshot. So that's more accurate, actually, than what this was about. And that night, the MIA met. It's not missing in action. It's the Montgomery Improvement Association. It was a group of black leaders who met together, and they said that the bus system of Montgomery, which they were very dependent, Montgomery is very dependent on its bus system, can't operate without blacks getting on and paying their dime or 25 cents or how much wherever they were going. It can't run without blacks, so let's boycott for a day. And that night they called for a day boycott, and they spread the word throughout the South. Nobody in Montgomery ride the bus. No blacks in Montgomery ride the bus. Any whites want to join us? We're glad to have you. But don't ride the bus. And so this is what happened. They began walking to work. And it shut the bus system down for a day. That was a moral victory. It wasn't going to do very much. Until one man shows up. This guy. He came from Atlanta.
Is he the same one that won the other?
No.
Other cases?
No, this is Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh, okay.
Martin Luther King Jr. comes from Atlanta. He comes to Montgomery, Alabama, and he says, I want to meet with the Montgomery Improvement Association. So they meet again that night, and he meets with them, and he says, a one-day boycott is not going to do a thing. Let's make it a boycott till they change the law. And it was very controversial. Many in the Montgomery Improvement Association said, it's really nice for a minister from Atlanta to come tell us what to do up here in Alabama. But our people need that bus to get to work. And if they don't make it to work, they'll be fired. And Martin Luther King said, permanent boycott till they change. And in the end, that's what they voted for. It was very close. And he now leads it. Again, many of the black leaders in Montgomery don't trust him because he's from Atlanta. That's dumb. Anyway, he leads this boycott. Almost a year, almost a full year, they don't ride the bus. Some white people join with him. And anybody who has a car picks up black people and drives them to work when they can. But mostly it's walking. We know of one woman who walked 20 miles each way each day so she wouldn't ride the bus. But she knew if she didn't show up, she was fired, and she needed the job. And they did it for a year, almost a year. And finally, it was crushing Montgomery. They were paying for a bus system that they were getting no money coming in. And so finally, the bus company talked the city leaders into changing the law and said, people can sit where they want. And first come, first sit. And they changed it. And that was monumental. And they say to Martin Luther King, where do you learn this stuff? How do you know how to do this stuff? And he said, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, two white men from the 1840s, and Mohandas Gandhi. And he stressed peaceful protest. Now, it didn't always turn out like he should, and we'll talk about that as we go on. But he wanted it to be peaceful. And he felt that was best. If you were non-threatening, but you were destroying their bus system, well, that was a good way to go.
Well, didn't Joe Biden march with him as well?
Oh, yeah, in his mind. Yeah. There is a man in Utah who did march with Martin Luther King. And his name is France Davis. And after certain things were passed, he moved to Utah and was the leader of the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Salt Lake. And I got to meet him and talk with him. And he was a very young man, 18, 19 years old when he did that. Now he's a very old man. But he still lives in Salt Lake and he still preaches sometimes. And he's quite amazing. Well, not the only time when people were rising up against things they thought were wrong. Khrushchev said, I'm going to open up things. I'm going to make things better for the people of the Eastern Bloc. Openness. And so the first actual little rebellion is in Poland, where they march to have rights. And it fails. The Polish police put it down. But the Hungarians said, it could work. And so the Hungarians overthrew the dictator that Russia had given them and took the previous dictator that they liked better. His name was Nagy. And they put him in place and they said to Russia, we'll stay communist. We'll stay communist. We're not going to be Russian communist. We're not going to be part of Warsaw Pact anymore. We want to be like Yugoslavia, who's communist, but they don't do what you tell them. That's what we want to be like. And Khrushchev, who had preached all this openness, sent the troops in. And in a most vicious way, here they knocked Stalin's head off a statue into the street, that kind of thing. And you can look, here, There are people dead in the back, and here's a woman grabbing a gun and going to fight Russian soldiers. And they fought the Russians. And the Russians came in with tanks, and sometimes the Hungarians took over those tanks. But it was doomed. Their strategy was call on the United States for help. Get NATO to come and help us. And NATO, the United States and the NATO nations looked at it and said, we're not ready for a nuclear war. We're not willing to take on Russia for this. And Khrushchev promised us, you help the Hungarians, it is nuclear war. And so we sat and watched. We sat and watched while they slaughtered the Hungarians. Killed that leader they put in and put back in the leader they wanted. And they hardened and solidified that. Now there was kind of a cool thing that started to happen, because where Hungary is located, I don't have a map right here, Hungary touches Czechoslovakia, and Czechoslovakia touches West Germany. And people began, from that Hungarian Revolution, to escape into Czechoslovakia and then into West Germany and freedom. It was dangerous, and many of them were killed, but they began to escape for freedom. And they came out and told their stories about how the Russians were treating them. And so we knew all about it. My dad, he had his own point of view on things, and I don't know he was wrong or he was right. But he was always so mad that Eisenhower wouldn't give the Hungarians some help. He was really mad about that. I didn't talk to him until 10 years later, and I was still just a little kid, but boy, he was mad at Eisenhower for that. But that's what happened. That same month of October, with that happening, there is a major crisis in the Middle East. And I should maybe ask, does anybody here remember the Hungarian uprising? Okay, that's okay. You were all not born, or maybe 1 year old, I understand. I got it. I
I'm
understand.
much older, but I don't remember.
That same month, Egypt said, under a guy named Abdul Nasser, said, I know the British built the Suez Canal through here for trade, but it's in Egypt. I mean, this is Egypt, that's Egypt. It's ours. And they nationalized the Suez Canal. Egypt takes it over and kicks the British and the French out and says, no, this is our thing now. We'll run the Suez Canal. And Great Britain and France says, no, you can't, you could cut us off from trade through there. And then to make matters worse, Russia says to Egypt, are they picking on you? Would you like some weapons? And Russia begins supplying weapons to the Egyptians. And so, the United Kingdom and France call upon Israel and say, let's invade Egypt. And they come to the United States and they say, we need you in on this. We need the United States to stop communism. This is why I can say the things I think about maybe Vietnam or Algeria. Eisenhower said, we're not doing that. We're not going to do that. We're not going to get involved. It's not our canal. It's not our property. They said, you got to stop communism. Russia's giving them weapons. You got to stop communism. Eisenhower said, you stop communism. We don't have to stop everything. And we did not get involved. And both the Great Britain and France called us traitors for this. It wasn't a NATO exercise. It was Britain, France, and Israel. And UK invaded, and France invaded, and Israel invaded into, would you believe it, the Gaza Strip, into Gaza, and attacked into Egypt. And basically, they took the Sinai Desert, this whole peninsula right through there, they took that away from Egypt. But Russia was pouring weapons into the Egyptians, and the Egyptians felt they were fighting for their country. And in the end, it was settled by a peace treaty. And it turns out the Egyptians were happy to take the Russian weapons. They had no intention of becoming communists. That was turning too much power over to Russia. So they got rid of the Russians eventually too. But that is once again more trouble in the Middle East. And ultimately Israel will go back to their borders and turn this back to Egypt eventually.
How did they get rid of the Russians?
They said, no thanks. We used your weapons. Here, we don't have the bullets to give back to you, but we'll give the guns back.
Didn't the Russians build the Aswan Dam?
They did build the Aswan Dam. Russia's plan was to expand into the Middle East. And this had presented them the opportunity, but the peace treaty ended their opportunity. Yeah, Russia poured money in there. They poured all kinds of things. But again, I think if we had maybe considered Vietnam that same way, we could have solved it different ways. I don't know. This is a picture of the Suez Canal, and these are ships. When Egypt took it over, they went out and sank British and French and even some other ships in the canal and blocked it. So after this war was over, it was a very short war, a 1 month war, they went in and had to drag the ships out of the canal to get it working again. Okay, it's a good place to take a quick break, maybe 2-3 minutes, stand up, move around, and we'll come back and finish this. Please remember the cameras are still on, so if you're going to say stuff bad about me, say it loud enough I can hear it later. What's that?
I said, that's what we thought.
That's true.
That picture of the ships in the canal there,
Yeah,
is that the ones they sunk? I can't see.
that's, yeah. Come up close and look at it. They sunk it, yeah. It's kind of hard to feel your way through communism now, or how to handle it.
Are you talking to the plant?
I'm talking
Didn't they all talk about the domino theory?
Domino effect, yeah. And
Gotta
now,
stop
Is it
them here.
Nicaragua?
if we don't stop them in Korea, next thing you know, we'll be fighting them in Hawaii.
Yep, that's his problems.
The best weapon against communism is capitalism. If we just have faith in our own system. We need to push and have faith and encourage freedom in enterprise.
Capitalism plus the shining light on the hill.
In what?
You gotta be the shining light on the hill too, you can't be capitalism.
And bully people with it and cheat people. Absolutely. But look what we've done in Vietnam. You buy a pair of gym shoes today, quality gym shoes, they're from Vietnam. They were made in Vietnam.
Well, do they still have as a tourist attraction, anti-aircraft gun, Jay South?
I don't know if they still have that or not.
They should.
Yeah.
Old Ross Perot right after he,
Yeah.
like he did, he was trying to pull one in.
I had a friend who was
Did you ever success with that?
I think some of those industries there were probably created by him.
the Hungarian woman sat
But
with
it's not that we should sell stuff to them, it's that we should buy stuff from them. You're gonna buy it from China. Buy it from China's enemy instead, Vietnam. My own personal opinion. Sorry, that was my own personal opinion. I just think our strengths, we have 700 churches in the United States, but we have faith. 3/4 of Americans say they believe in God. They have faith in God. Well, that's a strength. Let's use that. We believe in a reasonable capitalism, not cheating like you said, but building up industry so people can have jobs. Let's help them out. Democracy. There's some strength in democracy. Let's use that.
They'll take care of it.
What's that?
Did you see the size of those crabs?
Is that camera on?
Did he go buy more crabs? Did they go buy
Is this
more
camera
crabs?
on too? I better duck, huh?
His son-in-law, my son, go down to the port of Kodiak and buy crabs. And they are monstrous.
About this big.
One day they bought one crab and came back and cooked it. And they have 2 adults and 4 kids, and they couldn't eat it all. 1 crab.
Wow, that would be.
Is that the king
I
crab?
thought it
King
said
crab.
trap, and I thought, what are you trapping? Crab.
Huge and delicious.
My friend Molly, she used to get, she had a boyfriend, that was up in Alaska, and he'd get the king crab, and she brought out a bowl about that big for just her and I. It was really delicious. It was so good.
I didn't see that. That would be cool.
All right, you know,
I'm sure it's.
Oh, yeah.
Those are the tasties.
I had a classmate from Kodiak that
Oh,
earned
really?
enough in the summertime fishing up there to put him through law school.
Oh.
9 years, 9 months, I mean.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Can I show that around?
Yeah.
This is Sandra, Meryl's wife up there. She's gone up to help with the new baby, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
Oh, that's a nice big crab.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Bring that around.
She's gonna get spoiled.
Oh, I would love to be there.
Did you see Meryl's picture?
We need a bigger pond.
Yeah.
Oh, I would love to be there. King crab.
We're about ready to go again, and I'll let everybody know. Well, we're back, and I just want you to know that one of the people who come to our class, Sandra Swayze, went up to help take care of her daughter, our daughter-in-law, in Kodiak, Alaska, and she delivered a very healthy baby girl, 7 pounds, 14 ounces, the biggest one they've had, biggest baby they've had, and she's number 5. And they named her Julia Ann Peacock. And she's beautiful. And she's healthy. And she's just so sweet. And a good baby. And 2 grandpas here that are pretty proud, really, to be honest. And a grandma. And Meryl tells me that's number 19 for him. And number 13 for Gwen and I. So.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Oh, and I got to tell you what they did. They went to the labor room while she was in labor, and she and our son Brant sat and watched the replay of our history class that night. And that caused the labor to speed up really fast, and I guess it helped. I don't know. Okay, good. So the Suez Crisis. That is the end of containment, where Truman started the policy of containing communism whenever it's breaking out. Eisenhower brings that to an end with the Suez Crisis. We are not going to jump at every communist infraction. We're just not going to do it. Okay, now, still 1956, and negotiations are going on, okay? This is a man named Diem, and he will become the president of the state of Vietnam. That's what they called it, the state of Vietnam. And they divided it right here. And the state of Vietnam, Diem becomes, this is Diem in his younger days. He fattened up as time went on. And this is him in 1956. And he's got guards around him because he was not a great choice for president. It's hard to believe the people elected him of South Vietnam. He was Christian, not Buddhist. And what percentage, Mac, help me out, of the Vietnamese were Buddhist? Would you say high 90s?
I think so, at least where I was in the southern part. There were a lot of those places that worship.
Yeah, so Buddhism was the major religion, but he's Christian. He also was educated in French schools, not Vietnamese schools. And actually, because of that, and started very young, he spoke French better than he spoke Vietnamese. And so when he would speak to his people, he spoke Vietnamese with a French accent. And that went over like a pregnant high jumper, I'll tell you. Anyway, he was immediately very unpopular. How did he ever get in there?
Politics.
The CIA put him in there. The CIA went to the army that was gathering up and forming in Vietnam and said, "We will provide all the money you need. We were giving France help. We will give that to you and more if you'll put DM in." And so the army overthrew the elections, and without a decent election, put DM in as president of South Vietnam, or as they call it, the state of
They
Vietnam.
didn't have a pretend election.
They did have a pretend election. They didn't let the results out. They told them what the results were. Hey, DM won. And everybody looked around and said, "I didn't vote for him."
Isn't that what we do here?
I don't know. But I know it's what we did with our CIA there. I do know that.
Well, it's been done.
And up here, they call this the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. They only got one word in that whole thing right. Vietnam. But it's not the whole of Vietnam, so it's not right. Of is the word they got right.
Was it Democratic?
They were not democratic at all. They were communist. And they were not a republic, they were a dictatorship. But they, like China had done and Russia had done, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, they called themselves a republic and said that they were democratic, and they weren't. And Vietnam becomes 2 states, with Diem in the south and Ho Chi Minh, this is Ho Chi Minh, in the north. He's ruling as a dictator in the north, Diem is ruling with the army as a dictator in the south. Have you ever heard somebody say to their kid, "I brought you into this world and I can take you out"? We think that's pretty stupid. The CIA said that to Diem. "We made you president. We can unmake you president." Does it make you wonder about CIA?
Yeah, it makes you wonder about everything.
Now, Eisenhower does this amazing thing. It's recommended to him, he believes in it, and he pushes it in Congress. He gets Congress to really consider this. And we passed the 1956 Federal Highway Act, which created freeways in the United States. What do you think? What? Oh, sorry. Need to move? Move over here a little bit. Look at that map. This doesn't show you the plans, it shows you what ended up happening. Because there was actually another freeway that was supposed to come right here at Cove Fort and go across Highway 6, 50 and 6, into San Francisco. But it was never finished, never built. That part of the freeway was never finished. And you know this part right here was not finished until the 1980s. But it was planned. What do you know about it?
Well, I know he probably got the idea from the Germans in the Autobahn.
He'd been in Germany. Eisenhower was the military commander of NATO. He traveled those freeways. He said, "This is cool." But why is it built the way it was built? Does anybody know?
Because that's where the population is.
Okay, population back here, they need more people there. Although California maybe could have used more freeways, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe not then.
Yeah, maybe not then.
Wasn't it to facilitate military?
That's why Congress adopted it. The freeways were built to fight a two-front war in America. If we ever went to war, we needed to be able to transport troops and weapons back and forth across our country.
On one road.
Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 roads.
It's I-80 through California, one road.
Right here, yes.
Yeah.
But again, that's not what was planned. What was planned is that I-70 would continue right through here and go into San Francisco.
Is it true that the reason it's called I-70 is because it was built in the 70s?
No,
That is
not at all. It's because of how they numbered them. So you had I-10, I-20, or maybe not 20, 30, I-40, I-70, 80, I-90.
I see, okay.
The ones going east and west ended in 0. The ones going north and south, this is Highway 5, and over here by Boston is Highway 95. And they're numbered that way. What goes up through Utah?
15.
I-15. And that's why they were numbered the way they were. Zeros going east and west, 5s going north and south, and then there were freeways that crossed, like I-84 and some others, that went more at an angle. But that was to accommodate things. And again, the west is not nearly as covered as, of course, the east is. But it was built for military purposes. And I'll tell you one thing you may not know that I learned when I studied this. We had to agree in building it that 1 mile out of every 5 we built had to be perfectly straight for airplanes to take off and land
Really?
in time of war. Now, that's all fine and good till you try building it across the Santa Fe Swell, right?
Well, they found an aircraft out there with drugs on it.
Yeah, but we built the freeways with the condition that 1 out of every 5 miles we built. So you'd say, okay, here we're going to build this 5 miles. 1 of those miles has to be straight enough to be able to land big airplanes on. And it was built for military purposes, and thank goodness it's never really been used for military purposes.
Right.
But it sure has been used by the people. And I don't know, I'm not sure that in today's world, in today's economy, and with our huge debt, which we had debt in the 1950s, but it was disappearing, it was not huge. I still wish they had built that across there.
Yeah, that's why we.
But again, for the, 7 people that would travel it every day, whatever it was. Okay?
Well, it's because it was the last one built. They spent
It was.
money back there.
It was the last one to be built, and they said, oh, couldn't we do something over here? And they did. But here's Highway 10, Highway 20, and I don't know if there's a 30, but there is a 40, and
And
then
it goes to
70, 80, and 90.
And 90 doesn't come on across either.
We went to Alabama.
90 went into Seattle, but it didn't start till later.
North Nashville.
Fargo? No, that's 94. Starts up here in Montana. Well, no, it doesn't. Starts where? Sioux Falls? Sioux Falls. Yeah. Okay. One of the better things that Eisenhower did, I have to say, I think. Here he is signing the bill. 1957. What a year. What an incredible year, 1957. In October, the Russians launch the first satellite to orbit the Earth. In October 1957. Now it's time for me to ask, who remembers this?
I remember the word Sputnik.
Who remembers seeing it maybe?
Yeah.
Looking up. Because you could see it from the United States as it orbited.
I don't remember.
And it had a flashing light on it. And you know how huge that thing was? Look, here's the world. This is an actual size right here. It weighed 180 pounds. I eat more than that once a week. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't that big. There is Sputnik, and they're preparing it to orbit the Earth, and it shocked America like crazy. Now, why? Yes, Gwen.
Tom Lloyd said, Ike realized the need for the interstate system because he convoyed troops in one of his first military missions out of West Point.
Okay. Ike understood it because he had to convoy troops in one of his first missions out of West Point. Okay. Thank you, Tom.
And Jan said, if the military ever had to drive from Cove Fort to Highway 6 to Reno, to Reno, and then to San Francisco, they would have finished
Yep, that's true, they would have,
Mhm.
if there had been a better reason, or any place to stop. Anyway, that is not a bad drive, and it's the only 65-mile-an-hour speed limit in Nevada that you can go 90 without any worries. Because they're not going to pull you over, they don't care. Now I say that and watch somebody get on, I got a ticket. Okay. This shocked America. We were behind. Can anybody tell me why we were so far behind? Why they are launching a satellite and we have nothing?
We probably financed it.
No, we didn't.
What about the dog?
We're going to get to the dog. Now hold on, I know you're worried about the dog.
I am worried
We were lucky, yeah.
Russia was more in still in a war mentality, and we were on a peace mentality.
Russia was on a war mentality, and part of it is who we captured after World War II. We went after nuclear scientists. Germany was trying to build an atomic bomb. We went in and grabbed those, and we did get one rocket scientist, Werner von Braun, and we kidnapped him. But, we made him rich for helping us. But we mostly got nuclear scientists. They went in, Russia had invented rockets, and they went in and took rocket scientists and used them. So it was the old Nazi German scientists that built stuff for us. We were building better bombs. They were building space rockets. And they're ahead of us.
Well, didn't we think all we had to have was bombers?
We leaned on bombers. Well, I hate to say it, some of the later bombers that we built recently, within the last 20 years, are still based on the idea that our bombers can get past their radar and drop nuclear bombs. We still depend on that a lot, even though we have missiles that can make it from Arizona to Russia in 30 minutes. We still have that. But yes, we thought it would, and we came up with the B-52 Super Fortress.
SR-71 is the spy plane.
SR-71s, and we'll be talking about some others too. So the next month they launched Sputnik 2 and Laika, the dog. Russians want to be the first ones to get a living thing into space. And so here he is. This is a picture of him, a painting of him, and this is a Romanian stamp they made for Laika. There he is.
How long was he up there?
He was up there for,
Probably 90 minutes.
he ended up being about a day, I think. This is where he was encapsulated when they shot him up there. And when they sent him up, they knew one thing for sure.
He wouldn't come back.
He's not coming back.
Oh.
Not alive. They planned on him crashing. Russians didn't land in the ocean like you saw with the Apollo missions we did. They landed on land. And so they planned on him landing on land and going and then doing an autopsy and checking it out. But things went wrong right away. And he was crowded and it got too hot and he was dying of heat. And didn't have water. And he panicked and he barked and panicked. And so they sent it at a steep descent pattern and burned him and the capsule up. Science.
Yes.
Oh, I should tell you, how did the United States respond to this huge thing? This was October, then November. In December, the United States responded to this by having me born. I was born in December. And they said, now we'll get ahead. However, a good thing, it's not a great thing, but a good thing happens in 1957. You recognize Eisenhower, here's Martin Luther King Jr.,
Nixon.
here's Nixon. Congress passes over the objections of the Southern senators and congressmen, Congress passes a new Civil Rights Act, the first one since 1868. And it guaranteed blacks protection in voting and in registering to vote, guaranteed their civil rights. And here is Eisenhower signing it. Martin Luther King Jr. feels like he has been part of a great success. Nixon's happy.
Who's behind Nixon now?
I should know him. He looks familiar, but
He's tall.
I don't know him. Does anybody know him?
Is Martin Luther King pretty short?
Looks like it.
He wasn't real tall. It had everything in the bill except enforcement. It set up a commission that could investigate people violating human rights. But it gave them no authority to do anything about it. They could investigate. They could publish that it was bad. They couldn't do anything about it.
7 years later, they passed the Civil Rights Act.
Of 19, they will pass one in 60 and then the big one in 64. Okay? But all the histories I read says this was a big step forward. It wasn't the step, but it was a big step forward.
When did they assassinate Martin Luther King?
1968.
Okay.
1968. In 1957, these nations right here, Netherlands, Belgium, I got it here, France, West Germany, Netherlands, Italy, Luxembourg, and Belgium, in the Treaty of Rome, they met at Rome and signed the European Economic Community. They took down barriers between those nations. You could trade without paying tariffs. At first they thought it would just be for coal, shipping coal across that, but then quickly became pretty much anything. And it makes it so that you could travel from one to another without having to have a passport or be harassed or anything like that. What's the net effect of this? What's that?
EU.
The EU will come out later, but their economies boom because of this. Their economies explode. You can have coal miners in West Germany shipping coal to Italy, and there's no tariff or tax on it. It doesn't quite, but it almost makes them like one nation. Now later on we will get the EU, which will come a lot closer than that.
Where's East?
What's that? Here's East Germany.
West
I think where
Germany.
it's,
Oh, here's West Germany.
it's,
The capital of West Germany was Bonn. Capital of East Germany was Berlin. But that is this big step forward. And I love their propaganda, so I put this on here. Girls with the flags of their nations dancing because they've united. I thought it was cute.
Is that Czechoslovakia, right, that wide thing right in the middle of it?
Right here?
No, just between Italy and West Germany?
Right
No, this is Austria.
That's awesome.
And then this is Czechoslovakia.
Okay.
But that blip right there is Austria. Yeah. Okay? Then, remember in 1954 they desegregated schools? And the school board of Little Rock, Arkansas said, we'll desegregate Little Rock High School. 9 kids came forward and said, black kids came forward and said, we'll go. And they were scared to death. Can you imagine? And they gathered at a little place, a house nearby the school, and went in together. Protect each other. Okay? And one girl didn't show up in time, and so they thought, well, she's chickened out. She's not coming. And so they went in. She hadn't chickened out. She was trying to catch up to him. And this is her. Right here. That's her. And she's walking to school now through this crowd all by herself. Just a crowd of students, right? I don't know. I don't know if they were all students. There were some parents and things.
Looks like it.
Yeah.
Eisenhower, worried about it, had sent the army down there
Oh.
to protect them. Why didn't he just call out the National Guard?
Arkansas.
It was Arkansas. The governor of Arkansas said, you're not using our National Guard. And the governor's over the National Guard. So he sent troops in. He sent the 101st Airborne Division. If you know about troops, they were the best we had at that time. Here they are coming out from school, and here's the 101st Airborne Division escorting them home safely. But I want to tell you about this girl. Let me show you a close-up. There it is.
Wow.
You got,
What was her name?
I'm trying to remember.
Oh.
I can't. I'm sorry about that. We could look it up.
Those are mostly parents.
Looks like parents.
Tell me about this hatred. What's that about? She said I was walking by myself through there, and people were screaming at me and hollering at me. She was a sophomore, by the way, in high school. And she says, I looked around for anybody, and I saw an older lady with a kind face. And so I tried to walk closer to her, and when I got up close to her, she spit on me. Martin Luther King goes back to Atlanta. He forms the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He said, suing people is what Thurgood Marshall does, and he does it very well. Thurgood Marshall, an attorney, sues. I'm a minister. I don't think suing is going to work good enough. We're going to organize our Christian churches to peacefully protest. And we're going to emphasize peaceful protest. Now that's going to break down eventually, as many of you who lived through the 60s know. But he's going to try to have peaceful protest, and he forms the Southern Christian Leadership Conference made up of ministers to organize their congregations to peacefully protest, like he'd learned how to do in Montgomery, Alabama. But it was not going to sue people, they were going to protest. Okay? And that's founded in 1957. That was their first headquarters. The CIA. By 1957, the CIA was using 50% of its people and 80% of its budget not for information gathering, not for spying, for covert operations. And this is a list of nations that the CIA tried to overturn their elections, overturn and put in their people into, the people the CIA wanted into leadership. South Korea, Greece, Costa Rica, Albania, Syria, Burma, Egypt, Guatemala, Iran, and Indonesia. They'd already done it in South Vietnam. They were, the latest one they did was Indonesia. They had a bit of an attitude that they could do regime change when they wanted. And they were using their money not for gathering information, but for changing regimes.
And who was in charge of the CIA?
Different people, different ones.
But who oversaw them?
The President of the United States. The President has to sign off on some of these things. However, we learned by the time Kennedy comes along, the CIA had stopped asking for permission from the President.
They were just acting on their own.
Unelected agency.
Unelected bureaucrats running an agency
Yeah.
and ignoring their mission. What do we call that? Mission creep. They have a mission they're supposed to carry out, and instead they do more than that without permission. And that was the CIA in the 1950s. There it is. Looking good. It's the first commercial nuclear power plant goes online in 1957 in Shippingport, Pennsylvania. That's the first nuclear power plant.
It doesn't look like it's online though, to me.
No, at that point it's still being built.
Yeah.
And I had another picture I thought I could put on of an aerial picture of when it was finished. But
Now,
this is them still putting it together.
that big old tube there, is that the only one they have?
That is the core of the power plant. There was a lot more to a power plant than just that. You had to have cooling towers and many other things, but that's going to be the nuclear core. Yep.
That generated heat.
It generated heat, which made steam, which turned turbines.
Certain turbines.
Yep. Exactly what it did. And also, President Eisenhower says we got to catch up to the Russians. And so he asked Congress to create the National Aeronautic and Space Administration, NASA, and here he is speaking at his State of the Union speech and saying, I want NASA. And Congress passed it, and here's the first leaders of NASA holding up just a great rocket. Okay? But we suddenly have a National Aeronautics and Space Administration to try to compete with the Russians.
Didn't take them long to pass them on.
Okay, here's a question.
Okay, here's a good question.
Tom Lloyd,
Tom Lloyd.
do you have a sense of how Ike felt about the CIA? Did he quietly condone or condemn?
The CIA did something that employees have done to their bosses forever. They put him in a corner. They would bring him a crisis and say, here's the only solution, and he would sign off on it. He didn't like the CIA very much. And as he was leaving the presidency, he gave a speech about the military-industrial complex, where he basically says the CIA, weapons manufacturers, atomic scientists, etc., are running this country. And they're not doing it through elected leaders. As he left, he was quite bitter about the governance of America.
That was Eisenhower.
That was Eisenhower.
Remind me again when the CIA began?
The CIA began right after World War II. They had been, during the war, the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, and they had spied on the Germans, and as best they could, the Japanese, but especially the Germans. And when they were done, they said, well, we got to keep spying on them. And we did need to keep spying on them. And so they formed and changed it to the Central Intelligence Agency. At the same time, we changed it from the War Department to the Defense Department. At the same time, we got the National Security Administration Agency, National Security Agency, of experts to advise the president on security issues. We made some big changes. And one of those changes was changing the OSS to the CIA and funding them big time. And I want to tell you, maybe this is where we should start next week. We've run out of time.
Did the,
Would you like to know the worst thing that ever happened in the world?
no.
Okay, I'll tell you next week.
Tell.
In 1958, Chairman Mao says, we're not communist enough. We're just not communist enough. People are still owning their own little farms and things. And he called it the Great Leap Forward. You may have heard it called the Cultural Revolution. The Great Leap Forward. 5-year economic plan executed by Mao, and the Chinese Communist Party began in 1958 to last 5 years. It ended in 1961. Look how happy the people were about it.
Oh, yeah.
And look at this poster. This is a poster they put up everywhere. Chinese people, wealthy, happy, everywhere. It's just, look, this guy's flying on a rocket. I mean, this is awesome. This is the reality right here.
That's sad.
It was sad. It was worse than sad. They said we're going to force collectivized farming, take away all private farms and make people work on farms. And we're going to take the food from that and pay industrial workers to catch up with Russia and the United States in industry. And when the people didn't want to do it, they began to starve people to death and execute people. They said that the number of suicides was beyond belief in China then. And in that 3-year period, It's estimated that
That's
somewhere
the great
between,
leap forward, right?
what's that?
That was the great leap forward.
That's their great leap forward.
Yeah.
30 to 45 million Chinese were killed. Now, let's put that in perspective. 20 million Russians died in World War II, 13 million Chinese died in World War II, 6 million Jews, maybe as many as 45 million Chinese died at the hands of their own people.
Yeah. We discussed.
Famine, execution, forced labor, economic and environmental destruction.
Yeah.
Starvation.
The Great Leap Forward remains the largest episode of non-wartime mass killing in human history, and is a clear example of the failures of socialism and centralized economic planning, economic central planning. See, communism all sounds great to some people, doesn't it? It just doesn't work.
But you never hear this.
Good thing you came to this history class so I could tell you.
Yeah.
But this is historical. This is true. There's no lies here. If it's only 30 million, it's still the worst thing that people ever did to themselves, their own people.
How many did the Russians kill in gulags?
They estimate that Stalin, throughout the entirety of his time there, the 40 years or so he ran, Russia killed about 20 million people.
Okay, so this is worse.
But wait a second. I mean, think about it. In America, we lose some people in a coal mine. This whole nation comes together and mourns that. 2,000 people are killed at 9/11, and that's serious. That is huge. I don't know that I can conceive of 30 to 45 million people being starved to death and shot and hanged and tortured. I can't picture it. But that's what happened. Communism doesn't work by itself. Somebody has to make it work. I got to teach an economics class as I was subbing this week. And I said, what's the difference between communism and free market economy or a mixed economy like we kind of have? And they tried to tell me, and some kid said, well, is communism all that bad? And I brought this slide up and showed him. And nobody had any more questions. Okay, couple quick things. 1959, Castro takes over Cuba and makes it a communist nation. We kept Guantanamo. And Alaska and Hawaii become states in the United States. Alaska number 49, Hawaii number 50. And in 1959, we agreed with the Russians to trade a display. Russia's technology, they brought their own display. We brought our display, and it was a kitchen, a modern kitchen, and Russians got to come in and look at our kitchen. And we thought that was cool. And so our host was Richard Nixon. He went over there and got to take Khrushchev through and show him. And they started to argue. Now they had to do it through interpreters. Anybody recognize this guy right here? That's Brezhnev. He's going to replace Khrushchev. But they start this argument. And Nixon says, you don't understand anything about capitalism. And he said, if I don't understand Khrushchev capitalism, you don't understand communism. All you do is fear it. And they got into this massive thing, and Khrushchev said, yeah, you've got better fluff. You can't send anybody into space, but you got kitchens, and in a few years we'll patch you up on that too. And it got into be a real argument, kind of a running argument on the tour. And this, look, there's Nixon poking Khrushchev in the chest. I always like that picture. Anyway, and here they are talking again and arguing, debating. It's all being done through interpreters.
Weird.
Anyway, it was quite a cool event. I don't remember it, I was 2. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry we ran over a little bit. I wanted to finish it so that next week we can talk about the cultural history of the 1950s. Okay, thanks everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.